American Driver.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know, if I move the curtain, you can kind of see the like intense.
Oh my god. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Oh, my snapdragons are blooming.
Cute. Very nice.
Yeah. I'm so proud of them.
I'm in kind of constant like an ambivalent relationship with the plants in our like
Mhm.
work area because
Oh.
I think they all hate me.
Oh.
And I like begrudgingly care for them.
Well, you talk to them a lot.
I do talk to them, but mostly
yeah.
just being like, what do you want from me?
Tell me what. Which maybe I guess shaking them is a good way to help their root strength. So
Yeah, I guess
that's
it
mine.
is.
Yeah. So shall we? Someone's talking about sports in the chat.
Is that a topic for us to?
The sport.
Yeah. The football,
We've watched.
I
see.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, I've been watching the football, but
Yeah.
I think I'm going to dodge the sports topic by beginning our event. So hi everybody, welcome. I'm Eris Young. I'm the writer in residence at Lighthouse Bookshop, who are hosting this event. You can see their lovely window in the Zoom picture. So I'm going to be hosting the Q&A portion of this event. And tonight I'm going to be talking to Lilith and Abby, who are a queer couple who write, makes zines, do art, and ride bikes. Lilith grew up cycling around their hometown of Cambridge, and when they met, transplanted Abby's desire to walk the world onto two wheels. This is their first book, Gears for Queers, and it's born out of a series of zines that they created on their first bike tour, which was around Europe. So the pair set up Edinburgh Zine Library in 2017. I hope you are all familiar with the EZL, and if not, y'all should check it out. And obviously are also the author of Gears for Queers. So the book, which has just turned 1 year old. And so this book is a queer cycling memoir. It's a beautiful contemplation of relationships, mental health, sustainability, and ethical travel, disability and fitness, and also just a lovely adventure story that I really enjoyed reading. So there's going to be time for audience questions at the end of the Q&A session, and we'll be chatting a little bit throughout the zine making session as well. So if you think of any questions you want to ask Lily and Abby, you can put them in the chat. So let's get started. So first, do you want to tell us a bit about the book, how it came into existence, and why you wrote it, I think is the main thing.
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you first for the glowing appraisal. I feel like you should just write all of our blurbs and copy from this point onwards.
Do you want to say that you're Lily as well?
Yes,
and I'm Abby.
Lily.
We always forget to introduce ourselves.
Or which one's which.
Yeah.
Our neighbours still get us confused actually fairly regularly, but we'll just lean in. The book, how that happened.
Yeah, so basically we went on this cycle tour in 2016. It was our first sort of long cycle tour. And when we came back, we were like, we want to write some zines and we want to write about sort of the things we've learned on tour, but also mostly just vegan recipes, because that's what we're interested in writing about. So like Recipes for Wild Vegans this is our second one that we did. And yeah, we never planned really to write a book at all. What happened was we actually took our zines to the Edinburgh Radical Book Fair, and there was like it was kind of like a pitch a zine sort of event. And Lily pitched our zines, and someone picked them up and without our knowledge sent them over to Sandstone Press, who are our publisher, and we got a email from Kay a couple of weeks later asking if we had ever thought about writing a book about the experience, which was terrifying and very exciting.
No, we hadn't at all.
No.
So cool.
So yeah, we just sort of we met up with her, we chatted a bit, we decided we'd give it a go because it's a sort of opportunity that doesn't come around very often. And I think both of us separately had thought maybe we'd write something at some points in our, well, I did English lit at uni. I feel like that's the only thing you're supposed to end up doing, right? Writing a book. So yeah, we spoke about it. We wrote 10,000 words. They were the worst 10,000 words anyone has ever written,
So
ever.
bad.
But Kay obviously saw something in it or was just determined to get something good out of it. And asked for another 40,000, which we wrote. And at that point, we got a book contract. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think in terms of like why we wrote the book, it is a good question because the actual process of writing did feel like this step out into kind of the unknown and made us feel very uncomfortable at points, and the same with the experience of like publishing. But I think kind of like the driving thing for us was feeling like this would have been a book that we would have wanted to read before we left for the tour back in 2019, and that it was maybe, you know, about, we wanted to talk about the things that were important and of interest to us or that came up with for us that we hadn't read in other, especially like cycling books, but also more broadly isn't such a, or it can be drowned out in kind of cycle touring narrative more generally across like social media and like magazines and stuff. So I think it was really about trying to just like hold that little bit of space and just keep going until we couldn't. I think that was our approach to writing, and to publishing was to we're just like, well, we'll just take the next step and just keep going until we can't do it anymore.
That's kind of our approach to cycling as well, to be fair.
That does lead into my next question as well, which is like, what was it like writing as a team, and like, how did you split the work of writing, sort of in a technical, practical sense? But also, how does writing together compared to, and zining together and creating together compare to cycling together? So it's two questions, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, so when we started, we chatted with Kay about different ways that we could structure the book, and we were really keen on having like very distinctly our separate voices, because there were ways that our experiences were very similar, but also ways that they were very different. And we kind of went and read some other cycle touring books and thought about what people were doing and what worked for us and what didn't. Decided to split it up into kind of day-by-day accounts. And so right at the start, we wrote a list of every day where we went and where we started, where we finished, and decided who would write what, basically. And we sort of agreed on like a rough rhythm of like, you'd write one day of cycling and any rest days that followed, and then the next day of cycling would go to the other person. But within that, we also both had senses of like particular days that we felt were more our story than the other person's, or like the one day in Avignon where we still can't agree on a shared account of that massive argument we had.
I mean, I think basically we can agree that I was right by this point. Sure. I think it has been agreed.
Yeah, and we kind of just started from there.
Yeah.
With this like writing the days down, and it was actually really nice, and it, you know, that kind of links to the broader process of cycling together and creating together, is that I'm lucky that I enjoy doing it with you mostly, and it's really nice having, and you know, I think when we talk about our relationship, and particularly in terms of like disability, like I think ours is a relationship of kind of interdependence. Like we both facilitate the other to do things that wouldn't necessarily be possible if we were on our own or not receiving that sort of support. So I think in many ways writing together made the book possible in the same way that cycling together made cycle touring possible.
Yeah, I think I'd add as well, in terms of writing the book, the thing that was actually harder, writing the book was kind of easier than editing it together. In the editing, it became quite difficult because there were times when, you know, Lily would have a sentence structure that I'd just be like, you need to change this, and I was trying to change it to my voice, and I think we had to really push each other to not change each other's words to our voices.
Resist the urge to merge.
Basically.
One single voice.
And in terms of cycling together, I mean, I think, like Lily says, we work very well as a team. I don't think we could have done the cycle tour as individuals, like on our own. because we were learning so much as we went along, and we both had different skills that we brought to it as well. And yeah, in some ways the writing and the cycling are quite similar in that way, because it was just about this sort of merging of skills and knowledge that kind of took form in first a cycle tour and then a book. Then it just worked and it gelled together, which we're very lucky that it did in some ways. I feel like we always say with the cycle tour, like it's either going to make or break your relationship, because it's so stressful at times. Like it's wonderful at other times, but
which I think was a not relatable notion until everyone experienced, or like lots of people experienced lockdown with either friends or partners, and suddenly realized what, like, maybe closer to the experience of like living in a tent with another person for 6 months is either going to make or break your relationship with that person. So
we were just lucky that it didn't quite break.
No.
So another comparison I was wondering about would be like, how does writing, because I have a lot of thoughts on like the publishing industry, which we could make an entire event out of, I'm sure. But how does writing a sort of printed and bound book, a very sort of conventional like format, compare to zine making? And like what are the things that each form allows you to do that the other doesn't, maybe?
So for me, I think one of the distinctive things about zines is about controlling like distribution. So you really either decide explicitly who's going to have their hands on that zine, or by choosing to go to particular zine fairs, or by connecting with particular communities, you're sort of distributing within a community that maybe has like shared references to you, or kind of a shared understanding of certain like things. And yeah, so there's a feeling of kind of like a safety in that, which really with a book, like it just sort of goes out into the world and you don't have that same sense of security and safety. And like when it was first published, literally I woke up that morning and was like, I want to take a Sharpie to it. I want to go into every bookstore that it's in and just like erase these bits and change these bits and get rid of this. Because I'm so used to with zines being able to be kind of continually editing and reforming. And I think that was the thing I found hardest about the transition from book to zine, was
the very hard transition between editing and having it being written.
Yeah, because like, I don't know, especially when you're writing about yourself, like I feel like I tell the same story multiple ways and at different times in different places, and also different times it gets different meanings throughout my life. So the idea of this being like this one fixed like canon version of me,
like the story,
and a me that's so specific to a particular time and place that I can't just revise in my next issue, it's kind of disquieting,
especially since it is 5 years ago that we went on this tour, and I think the ways in which we've changed now are so significant, and it's very weird reading it back and being like, oh god, I was such a twat half the time. Like that's, sorry, I just
we all think that of ourselves, but yeah.
But I think for me, the major difference, I find writing zines a lot easier simply because there's no pressure to be perfect in them. Like there's so many ways that you can just sort of, you can make spelling mistakes, you can write what you want, and no one's gonna comment on it. No one's gonna
send back notes about it and be
exactly
like, oh, maybe you should change this, and you're like, no.
It was hard work writing the book. It was enjoyable though, I have to say. It was just very different.
And I think we're quite keen to like make it clear that like for us, writing your book wasn't like a graduation from zines, because I think sometimes it's easy to think it is because the book came from some zines, but actually like there's such distinct ways of producing and sharing your voice and writing. And I think like our zine making practice has continued well alongside the book, as opposed to us being like, well, we've made it now, we're published authors, like what need have we for zines?
Yeah, we also had a lot of we were really struggling with the fact that we were publishing a book when we first thought about it as well, because we were concerned about the idea that, this was going to be, why were our voices being elevated above other people's voices? Why, what sort of like ethical implications was putting a book out there going to have? What sort of like I mean, books as well, they're not exactly the most environmentally friendly things as well. And I think we had all these things where we were like, oh, this is like a very strange,
Profit-driven.
profit-driven thing to do, and sort of very the antithesis of a zine, really, in some ways. So we really thought hard about doing it, but in the end we were like, no, this is like Lily said, this is the book that we would have wanted to read going on a cycle tour. This would have helped us do that.
And also that I think sometimes it's easy to feel like there should just be like, oh, there's only space for like one alternative narrative in cycle touring. So you're like, oh yes, we are the diversity quotient, and we know that we're not representative at all of the diversity of people who cycle tour. But actually,
it
like,
ends up falling into that. It gets
yeah, exactly. Like, it's so easy to just whereas actually, like, there's so much space for so many different books on the shelf, and like we shouldn't just be like, we can't because that makes sense.
Possibly driven by imposter syndrome a bit, those thoughts sometimes as well. I don't know.
I have issues with imposter syndrome, but that's a bigger.
right there with you. So one of my favorite things about the book was that you make a point to include the more sort of like unglamorous side to cycle touring, that un-Instagrammable side, especially the ways that cycle touring impacted both of you, both of your mental health at the time. So why is it important to include this side of cycling that we don't really see on Instagram?
I think when we came to write it, we had to ask ourselves these questions, and I think this was something we were super agreed on right from the beginning, that we wanted to be as honest as possible, because quite frankly, we're kind of fed up of the cycle tours that we were seeing on our feed at the time, who were just like, this is super easy and you need no money and you just go off and it's like the easiest thing and you just get magically fit and anyone can do it. And we're like, no, that's doesn't take into account a huge amount of experience that other people have when they cycle tour. And so we wanted to be like honest, so that we could show people that there were different ways of cycle touring, and you didn't have to be this idealized version of what a cycle tourer looked like to just go and enjoy being on a bike and having a bit of an adventure on it. So I also think, like, for me, a lot of the ways that we wrote was linked to, I think often when mental health is written about, it's written about in like really big dramatic terms, in terms of like, you have this breakdown, or you have this period of illness and then you recover, and it's sort of kind of discrete. But for me, especially, like, mental health is interwoven into like the mundane and everyday things, and it informs, every choice I make, basically. And especially at this time when I was like, I'd only been out of hospital for like 2 years, so it was really informing every choice I was making. And I felt like it was important to show that aspect of it, because there's a tendency sometimes to feel like it's like dragging it down and being kind of a bit boring. But actually, like, if we can articulate where mental health and stuff happens in kind of the boring everyday choices, as opposed to having to be about these dramatic like moments, it sort of makes, I don't know, it's the sort of thing that I think is important to do in Trouble, in this idea that it's either like you're either mad or sane in a particular moment, or that an adventure like this could like fix you and that's it, done and dusted.
Or that it's only possible if
that's a very like novel plot idea of
exactly, like and I think, and that also links to kind of the kind of journey in terms of like fat positivity and stuff, this idea that like you can only do these things once you achieve a certain body size or a certain level of fitness or a certain level of independence or mental health or whatever. Actually, like, you can still do them but in radically different ways, and it's going to look different. And hopefully it makes it more accessible to people who are considering it. That's what we kind of were aiming for by saying those things.
I think like definitely seeing the two of you like doing it and your honesty really like made me feel like not only that I wanted to do it and wanted to have an adventure, but also that I could do it and that it is for me. And I think it did affect my decision to buy my bike. I was like, I got a touring bike specifically. I haven't toured yet anywhere, but
nice.
But yeah, definitely feeling like by pushing against the kind of image of people who are like, who we see doing these things, we change the narrative around who's allowed to do these things, which I thought is really important. So we have one audience question so far, and there's going to be plenty of time for more, so y'all can stick them in the chat. I'm going to append it to my, this is quite a big question. So my question is, what advice would you give, especially to queers, especially to disabled and mentally ill queers who want to get into cycling, but maybe don't know where to start or are intimidated? And also a question from Grace about, are there any other cycle touring books and zines that you recommend and resources? And then there's a second half of that question that I'll ask after.
Cool. So I guess the thing that got me into cycling was having someone who knew what they were doing and was willing to like very much baby step me through the process of learning how to ride a bike. I knew how to ride a bike, but I was unconfident on riding on roads and things like that. So having Lily be able to help me with that, and I think that's a good place to start, finding a friend or, you know, a family member or someone to take you out on your first sort of like bike ride and get you used to riding. Not necessarily on roads, maybe it is just about getting confidence riding again, because I think a lot of people like me especially stop riding when they're sort of teenagers, and then it's only later that you're like, oh, maybe I'm gonna give this a shot again. But I guess that sort of ties in a bit to, you know, finding a sort of community as well. I know that there are some places that do, I know Bike for Good in Glasgow did a like queer cycle ride.
And we did one in Kirkcaldy.
Yeah.
So Bike for Good.
Yeah, Bike for Good. They did one as part of the Leap Sports, like the Leap Festival fortnight.
Yeah.
And I know there are places across Scotland really, and England, I suppose, that are increasingly like running or trying to run more inclusive rides or explicitly queer spaces or spaces that centre women, trans and femme folk. And I think my answer sort of builds on that and links also to Grace's question in terms of this idea of like community. I think for me, letting go of expectations of what I should be doing or should be able to do was really important. So like giving myself permission to get off my bike when I felt overwhelmed by a road setup and just walk it and not feel like that was some huge admission of failure as a cyclist was really important. But also connecting and shifting, like being much more intentional in like who we followed on Instagram, for example, and how they were talking about cycling and cycle touring and the stuff that comes up with that. So in terms of like cycle touring zines, so we highly recommend following Cyclista zine. I'll put them in the chat as well. Do they have an underscore, you know?
I don't think so.
Okay, I'll do it without an underscore, but you'll probably find them. No,
no.
I spelled that wrong. All kinds of catastrophic. But they make bike zines. That's one, Bike Liberation. This one's about DIY bike culture. And they're really like they're a zine and also just a platform that prioritizes Black, Indigenous, people of colour cyclists, women, trans, femme folk, queer cyclists, and generally just do like an amazing job of building a community around them that's kind of radical and engaging with cycling from kind of an intersectional feminist perspective, just generally being awesome and generous with their knowledge. And I think like for me that was also important in terms of shifting that feeling of like I'm an individual failure to a more broader sense of like, why isn't the road set up for me as a cyclist? Like why can't I ride on this road? It's not my fault. It's the road's fault. And that was such an important shift for me in terms of building confidence. And the same like as a queer person feeling like, oh, maybe the world should just be set up better for me and people like me. Not feeling like I'm the one that's like difficult or the problem in that context or that community.
Yeah.
Um,
I think as well, if you're planning a tour in different countries and stuff and you're worried about that as a queer person, it's sort of similar things apply. Finding community, like looking for the sort of places that you know are going to be safe, and and sort of focusing on that, I guess. We haven't ever cycled anywhere that's had a particularly, we were in Hungary, and that's possibly the most hostile place that we've been, in terms of being
in terms
queer.
of legislation,
Yeah,
in
but
terms of actually our encounters with people,
For the actual people.
yeah, and because we were using kind of warm showers and we were hosteling and stuff, like we were already putting ourselves in kind of radical contexts that exist across different countries. And so overwhelmingly our experience was positive. And I think, like, the considerations, sometimes I feel like we don't talk about being queer enough in the book, because it just sort of is the thing that is.
It's the milieu.
Yeah, and it's very hard to disentangle the ways that shapes how you are in the world sometimes, because you're just like, I can't imagine a different way. But I also think it's because on the cycle tour, the ways that we were in the world was no different to how we were at home. Like, you do just assess situations as you go and figure out what you're comfortable disclosing or not disclosing, and all that sort of stuff. And so
and there was one time on that tour where we ended up staying at a lovely family house in France, and when we got upstairs there were pictures of the Pope everywhere, and we were just like, they might not be homophobic, but maybe let's just not mention it. It's just not essential to mention it.
So
and
it's
that
just
was
this constant navigation, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think searching out, and we have I think we are going to add to it, but we have a short like resources page on our website, which is DS for Queers, with just like people that we follow or things that we read, or generally that we feel are part of like a broader cycling community that is like the sort of cycling community and culture that we want to be part of. So check that out, or maybe check that out in like 48 hours when I've checked it and made sure that it's like up to date.
The link on yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love this point that you make about like maybe the world should just be set up better. That's something that I've been thinking about a lot, and I think it helps to do away with a lot of the sort of shame and guilt that we're given as queer people, as disabled people, as mentally ill people. Yeah. So let's see. It's 7 now, so we were going to have a short break, 5 minutes for people to stretch, get a cup of tea, have a bathroom break, or whatever. While that happens, should we have some fun chat about cycle touring?
Sure.
I want to know. So that's 5 minutes on the clock. I don't know how strict we're being about this. But in the meantime, do you both want to talk about your dream cycle tour? If you could cycle any route or location in the world, where would you go and why?
Can I just say, firstly, I resent the implication that the last 30 minutes wasn't fun cycle touring chat.
Sorry.
This is the serious stuff.
Right. How about unserious?
Yeah. Okay. Where would you go?
I mean, 100%. The thing that I want to do more than anything is the Silk Road. I think it would be incredible, and there's a lot of people.
Cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of people we follow who've done that route, and like some of like Uzbekistan in particular looks like incredible.
Oh, but it's so windy because it's just this long straight.
That's my worst nightmare. Like
road. Yeah. You see these videos of people in it, and it's just headwind for like days.
The main issue as well is, so we've looked up the route, and as an English person, like English nationality, you can't go through Iran, so you have to get this boat from like, I feel like it's from maybe not Georgia, maybe it's Armenia, up to Kazakhstan. But the problem is this boat sinks like every now and then. It's like just occasionally it sinks, and you are just like,
in a very like non-dramatic way. And it also because
like, oh, the boat's sinking again.
Yeah. Shucks. Because the weather's very changeable on the particular bit of water it's on. Sometimes it will just stop for like 3 days.
Yeah.
Just holding out. So there's no way of really accounting for when it's going to turn up, how long you're going to be on it, or when you're going to arrive at your destination, which for me is like my nightmare public transport experience.
Mm.
Like I can think of nothing worse.
Yeah.
But
I feel like, yeah, I'd love to go. I'd love to get through China. I'd love to maybe then there's a route in South Korea I've always wanted to do, which they have a completely like cycle path. It's cycle path from Seoul to Busan, and it's like just like 200 miles,
Yeah,
maybe even
beautiful.
further, of just pure cycle path. And they've made it incredibly accessible. They have like little cafes along the way and like little
toilets.
toilets, which is important. So
I feel like my desires are so much more like small scale than Abby's. Just like I'm immediately like, I'd like to cycle in the Hebrides. Like that would be my ideal. Because there's a route you can do basically from the bottom to the top of to Hebrides, and you like you cycle and then you take the ferry and then you cycle some more. And I feel like now at the moment that feels like an impossible dream. Like
you're a bit pessimistic
I
sometimes.
am pessimistic.
I feel.
I think I'm realistic about the practicalities of cycle touring when you have to like book ferries, because times of arrival when you're on a bike is so variable that it's better to just be able to turn up whenever. But
yeah,
I just think it would be beautiful and so close to home, and
yeah,
you can wild camp.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I'd like to do the US at some point as well, because they're converting a lot of the old train tracks to cycle paths at the moment, so you can get
really? I didn't know that.
it's called the Great American Rail Trail. And if you look online, there's like a map of it, and the only place it seems like it goes across, it starts in Washington DC and goes to Seattle, so it goes right across the country. But yeah, they're currently doing that. I think the only place that doesn't have cycle paths is Wyoming. So yeah, it looks really cool. I'd like to do that at some point. Although yeah, I guess America's a little bit.
Have you got
nice
plans for a first tour, Eris, with your tour?
I don't know. I have to do. So far my like max distance that I've gone is like an hour. Like to South Queens Ferry or whatever. I really want to do more, but I have to get better about maintenance and knowing how to. I feel like the ideal would be like, I don't know, like Japan or Silk Road or something like that. Like, you can talk about like my dream, which is an attainable goal right now. That's something I might actually get to do, but also like my dream, which is like, I'm probably never going to be able to do this. So I'll just splash out. But yeah.
Japan is supposed to be very good.
We should do like, I think we need to do like a big queer cycle tour just out of Edinburgh. I don't know where we go.
Oh yeah,
go to Glasgow.
Glasgow's fairly easy
just
to
along
get
the canal. It's straight, it's flat. There's no speed and fish and chips in Falkirk. Like, what's not to recommend it as a as a jaunt? Yeah, and then paddle back.
Yep. I always feel like I'll get far enough and then I won't want to turn back. Like I go to the Pentlands quite a lot, and that's always really nice because it's like slightly downhill on the way back.
Nice.
Yeah, hills shape everything. Every decision I make about where we go is based on how hilly it is, essentially. Yeah.
We'll go through the fens, so yeah.
Your descriptions of the Alps were like mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, I don't know how we ended up living somewhere quite so hilly, but
we have an e-bike now, so we just need never worry about hills again. I think that's
the problem. We only have one e-bike though, so one person gets to coast uphill, and the other person gets to like slog beside them.
Yeah.
Exhausted, but yeah, we'll get a second e-bike one day. Can 100%. E-bikes are an entirely new thing for us, and we can definitely recommend.
Yeah, they're brilliant.
As a thing, there's like we got ours through Transport for Scotland, run a yearly like e-bike loan scheme where they'll loan you the money for an e-bike interest free, and then you pay it back over 5 years. And it's like 2 e-bikes per household or 1 e-cargo bike. So we got an e-cargo bike between us, and then we just pay it off each month. And one day we'll, have paid off our huge loan. But yeah, it's good.
That's great though. Yeah. Right. Well, it's like 7:07 now. So how do you feel about starting soon on workshopping. Let's say, well, first I want to say thank you both so much for having this chat with me. It has been so much fun. I've learned a lot, and you really had given me a lot to think about. And thank you very much for writing this book. And I can't believe it's a 1-year-old book already.
It's very
Where's the
exciting.
year gone?
Mind blowing.
What a year as well. Yeah. Well, it was lovely chatting, and hopefully some of what you're thinking about might end up in your zine page that you will make in the next.
Yeah, and if people
30
want to keep
minutes.
asking us questions, once we've described the workshop, we'll answer greater